Good day, students, and welcome to another lecture on the history of India between 750 CE and 1206 CE. Today, we will be talking about the history of crafts and guilds. The early medieval period saw a continuation in the tradition of excellence of craftwork in India. In various fields of craft and artisanal work, there was considerable development, and the fruits of this labor turned up in various domestic and foreign markets, thus feeding the growing trade networks. Another feature of this world was the development of organizations in the form of guilds, both for artisans as well as traders. Of course, given the huge regional diversity of India, development of crafts as well as guilds varied greatly from region to region, and there was a notable divergence in the nature of guilds between North and South India. Given how closely trade and commerce and urban development came to be tied to craft and artisanal work in South India, that deserves its own separate discussion. So, we will start off with a brief overview of Indian crafts during this period. Now, crafts developed in different directions at this time. Firstly, there was considerable development and expansion of agriculture. This made possible the large-scale cultivation of cash crops for the market, and there arose a range of crafts and industries centering around processing these crops into valuable commodities for trade. The principal example here is the sugar industry, which proliferated. There are numerous references to the making of sugar presses and the making of sugar candy and molasses. From Chinese and Arab sources, we know that sugar-based commodities were meant not just for the domestic market, but were also being exported. These products were sent to Gujarat, where they were exported via sea routes. Another important industry that depended on cash crops was the textile industry. This was an old industry with a rich heritage and history, and the old levels of excellence were maintained. Older centers of the textile industry, like Kaushambi and Mathura, had declined in importance, but they were soon replaced with new centers that became prominent in the early medieval period. From the Manushollash, we come to know about Mulasthan near present-day Multan, Anahalipataka in Gujarat, Vanga, that is eastern Bengal, and Nagapattana in South India in the Chola kingdom. Historian B.P. Majumdar has pointed out that based on certain inscriptions, it can be argued that the weaving industry had also spread to Assam. Another center was Mangrol in Gujarat. Of all the textiles, however, it was the products of early medieval Bengal that achieved special fame in the international arena, as Arabic, Persian, and Chinese texts, and even the accounts of the famous European traveler Marco Polo praised their superb quality. Moving to South India, historian Vijay Ramaswamy has done excellent research on the textile industry there. Using inscriptions like Saliyar and Kaikollar, she has discovered a lot of important information on both weaving and weavers. Most remarkably, these weavers combined their craft professions with also being professional soldiers. They joined together to form craft organizations like the Samaya Pattagar, Salia Samayangal, and Senia Pattagar. These organizations were extremely cohesive and contributed to the success of the weavers. They have been recorded as being donors or patrons to temples, gifting cash, livestock, and cloth. Kings deposited money with them, and the interest from the capital was used to hold festivals. Clearly, these were trusted and prosperous professional organizations. The other notable agriculture based industry was oil making from oil seeds. This industry was growing in importance, and this is attested to by the increasing number of references to it in inscriptions and texts. The oil press at this time was known by the term audra, but the term of more commonplace use was ghanak. We find extensive and realistic descriptions of the use and operation of the ghanak, as well as its use as a simile in literature and religious texts. Historians like Ranabir Chakraborty have argued that this means its use was prolific and regular. It was essentially an important part of daily life. Interestingly, it should be noted here that prior to the 8th century CE, the ghanak is not really found in texts or other sources. So it can be imagined that this was a new invention introduced to the craft sector in the early medieval period. The ghanak would continue to have sustained socio-economic importance. Early medieval sources glorify the gift of a ghanak, and it is equated in terms of merit to the donation of a tank or a well, which were already seen as precious. From an 11th century text, we come to know that damage to a ghanak was sharply criticized and condemned. Thus, it occupied an important place in social consciousness, and this testifies to the sustained importance of the oilseed industry. In fact, oilmen or tailikas would often be referred to in early medieval documents. Apart from agriculture-based industries, metalwork was a respected field of artisanal work. There was great use of metal implements, specifically those of iron. Examples of this craft are found in the iron beams of the Gundichabari temple in Puri. Letters of Jewish merchants dating between 11th and 12th century testify that the ironsmiths of Karnataka were especially skilled at making different varieties of iron. These were highly in demand and even exported outside India to ports like Aden. Aside from iron, Indian smiths were extremely skilled with copper, and this is made clear by the existence of the large number of copper plates. Bronze sculpture was also an area of specialization, and this is best demonstrated by the profusion of bronze images, especially from South India. Again, referring to letters of Jewish merchants, it has been discovered that there was a bronze workshop owned by a Jewish person named Abraham Yishu in 12th century Mangalore that was very well known for bronze craft work. Aside from decorative work like copper plates or bronze images, we also know that Ongo or Eastern Bihar was quite well known for its proficiency in sword making, and numerous Arabic accounts testify to great foreign interest in this industry. Moving further east, we come to the famous center of craft work known as Srihatto, which is modern Sylhet in Bangladesh. From inscriptions dated to around 930 CE, we can know that Srihatto had blacksmiths or kormokars, leather workers or chormokars, braziers or kongshokars, carpenters or shutradhars, architects or sthapotis, washermen or rajakas, florists and garland makers, also known as malakars, as well as other supporting professions like barbers or napits, astrologers or gonoks, scribes or kayasthos, physicians or vaidyas, etc. Srihatto itself was a fascinating place that had been created in the 7th and 8th centuries CE by clearing the forest and marshes. And this extensive list shows its rich socio-economic life in the 10th century. Historian Ranabir Chakraborty has argued that this entire settlement was only made possible through agrarian expansion via land grants, and it was only after this initial development that craft and other professions blossomed. Thus, he goes on to argue that early medieval practice of land grants did not stifle crafts and trade, but on the other hand, could actually encourage them. Having discussed crafts, we now move on to the discussion of guilds. It is well established by a study of inscriptions and legal literature that craftsmen formed professional associations or organizations known as Shreni or Goshti under the leadership of master craftsmen in early medieval North India. However, from the 10th century CE, some new characteristics can be discerned about this aspect of craftwork. It seems that there was a marked decrease in perpetual endowments made to guilds, specifically in cash. Earlier, the guilds had acted as banks and had paid interest to the beneficiary. This practice had also ensured a flow of important and valuable financial resources to the guilds. The reduction in these endowments had been interpreted by some historians to indicate a reduction in importance of these professional bodies in this period. Another feature of guilds at this time was the presence of multiple headmen of guilds for each profession, like oil makers, garland makers, etc., which signify great competition within the profession, rather than the idea of harmony and cooperation that guilds had previously stood for. Historians have remarked that it was also at this point of seeming decline of guilds that seemed to transform into hereditary, specialized occupations confined within the bounds of large families. Socially, this meant that lawmakers tended to classify them as jatis and assign them relatively low social status. This decline and transformation of the guilds requires further study. If we look at contemporary sources like the Mitakshar, they discuss the guilds as occupational subcastes, though they also remark on their more diverse origin. So, one such description of a Shreni is a group of people of different castes who subsist by the occupation of one caste, and give as examples horse dealers, weavers, and shoemakers. Other sources, like the Smriti Chandrika, classify Srenis as comprising of 18 low castes, such as the washermen. Later sources seem to ignore the professional basis of the Srenis and describe them as corporations of many people belonging to the same caste and profession. Guilds in North India at this time seemed to have become more localized, with their area of influence and operation confined to certain areas. Thus, the contemporary writer Medhatithi differentiated between Srenis and Shanghos. To him, Srenis were organizations of people who followed one profession and acted in one region, whereas Shanghos were organizations for people of different castes and regions. In this period, the role, importance, and power of the head of the guild had increased. They could reprimand, condemn, and even expel members who had violated the rules of the guild. Various inscriptions from the early medieval period mentions heads of guilds and their increasing role. A chief could accept an endowment on behalf of the guild and to fulfill interest payments on it, impose a cess on the members. Heads of guilds also built temples and received support from members in doing so. This increasing power was not always a good thing. In the Smriti Chandrika, there are records of guild members suffering under the increasing power of their chief. In such situations, however, they could complain to the king, who had the right to intervene. Such intervention usually took the form of the king first advising the chief to change his ways, and then this could escalate to fines on a graduated scale if he did not comply. This could eventually escalate all the way to confiscation of all property of the chief and even his expulsion and banishment from the kingdom. Different guilds were organized in different ways. So, for example, architects, carpenters, masons, and temple priests governed themselves through their collective assemblies and appointed committees. In such groups, earnings were shared on the basis of work, with harder workers getting paid more. In other guilds, members appointed 2 to 5 superintendents who would help in governing the guild and whom members were required to obey. Guilds often framed their own rules to govern the conduct of their members as well as guild activities. Thus, manufacture and sale of products also came under such a rule structure. All members were required to pay cesses and fees to the guild. Some guilds even had their own armed forces and troops. There is some debate regarding which professions were organized into guilds. One text, the Jambudip Pragyapati, mentions potters, weavers, goldsmiths, cooks, musicians, barbers, garland makers, rope makers, betel sellers, leather workers, oil pressers, cloth printers, braziers, tailors, cowherds, fishermen, all in one list. To this, Al-Biruni, the famous Arab traveler, adds fowlers, shoemakers, jugglers, basket and shield makers, sailors, hunters, and weavers. Legal texts like Medhatithi mention moneylenders, artisans, tradesmen, and coach drivers. Other texts also refer to horse traders and weavers. Some inscriptions have listed distillers of liquor, gardeners, and elephant drivers. Now, we come to the discussion on South Indian guilds. Early medieval South India had a very rich history of guild activity, but these bodies were more organized around trade rather than craft work. Historian Champakalakshmi has said that 2 points of caution need to be observed while studying these guilds. Firstly, even though the term guild has been commonly used by historians to describe these organizations, it is difficult to get enough historical evidence to prove that all the features that are usually assumed to pertain to a guild, such as a well defined structure, a code of conduct, membership governed by regulations and qualifications, actually applied to them. Thus, they should not be compared to or taken to be analogous of European, Chinese, or Egyptian guilds. Secondly, there are many problems in conclusively determining the nature of these organizations and their membership. Many names have been found in the historical record, like Ayavol, Ainuravar, Valanjiyar, Nagarattar, etc. And apart from Nagarattar, most of these names refer to itinerant merchant bodies. While the Ainurvar, which is famous in history as the 500, figure prominently, it is far more difficult to determine the relationship of all the other bodies with the Ainurvar. Therefore, it is useful to define the various bodies which were operating at this time. The 500 was a large supra-regional body of merchants. The Manigranam was a more localized body limited to specific regions, even though they did interact with the 500. And the Anjuvannam was an organization of foreign merchants who operated on the west coast, specifically Kerala, in the 8th and 9th century periods, and then the rest of the coast from the 11th century. They interacted with the local merchants and the 500. Initially, 500 referred to Jewish merchants, but later the term was also used to refer to Arab traders. Bodies of merchants which operated in markets and other trading centers, specifically where local and regional trade intersected, were also sometimes called nagarams, which was also the term used to refer to these urban centers. These bodies were constituted of local traders and mainly confined their activity to local matters. A broader term for the trading community as a whole was Nagarattar, and this term is still in use in a modified form today. According to historian Champakalakshmi, the 500 was created in the 8th century in Aihole of Karnataka. Apparently, a group of 500 Mahajans established it to cement their control over the commerce of that region. With time, this corporation expanded, and even though the name 500 remained, it gained many new members from different areas. The 500 came to be associated with different groups at different times. A common type of group was the armed mercenary group, who were hired on to protect traders and their merchandise. These were not just guards but warriors renowned for their valor. In ancient inscriptions, sculptures show them using elephants and cavalry. Some of these warriors could even change profession to become merchants themselves. The 500 also had close association with craft groups, and these links were used for more efficient purchase, marketing, and sale of commodities. Thus, it should be noted that the 500 should not be thought of as a single unified body of merchants throughout its entire history. While it was united and had a common purpose in its initial years, as time went on, there was a bifurcation in the guild between the Kannada and the Tamil speaking regions. Thus, in Karnataka, the body came to be known as the Ayavol and established several towns. They received patronage from Chalukya and Hoysala kings. Meanwhile, in Tamil Nadu, the 500 took the name the Ainuruvvar, and it came to constitute a composite body, drawing its trading members from all across the various Tamil speaking regions. According to inscriptions, membership varied not just by region but also by caste and religion. Thus, from this discussion, it can be understood that in the early medieval period, with the continued development and profusion of crafts and their high level of excellence, craftsmen and artisans united and formed their own guilds both in North and South India. Moreover, this high level of craft development naturally entered the market and stimulated both local, national, as well as international trade. And therefore, to feed this growing market demand for crafts and through operating these various networks of trade, the merchants formed their own organizations, and with organizations like the Ayavol and the Ainuruvvar, it made it possible for them to reach wider markets. And thus, India's craft and agricultural commodities could reach all corners of the country as well as the export markets.